Okay, welcome to our final of this year's Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics lectures. I think all of you I know, so you know I'm Lawrence Lessig, and I'm the director of the center and a professor here at the law school. The idea for this lecture this evening grew out of my felt need to produce some balance in matters close to political matters. I've been a student, as I explained before, of Jim Cooper's insights into Washington for many years. I sent him my book on corruption. He gave me the most critical comments I've received ever from anybody in anything I've ever written. I'm still recovering from that, but I count him as a friend. And I was eager to have him come address the question that he's been teaching me about, which is Congress and how do we fix Congress. But as everyone here knows, Jim Cooper is a Democrat, and my thought was we needed to have a Republican who could address the matter from a different side, but with a similar insight. And so I asked one of my favorite Republicans, a former campaign manager for John McCain and George Bush, about who it was on the right that he thought about these issues and cared about them as much as I do, these issues about money and politics. And he recommended tonight's speaker, Buddy Roemer. So Charles Elson Roemer, a.k.a. Buddy Roemer, is a graduate of this college and of the Harvard Business School in 1967. He was a congressman from Louisiana from 1981 to 1988, but back then he was a Democrat. He used to call them boll weevil Democrats, as was just about everybody else in Louisiana in the 1980s. In 1987, he, along with an all-star cast of candidates, challenged the three-term incumbent Edwin Edwards, candidates like Bob Livingston and Billy Towson. And Roemer ran a campaign in 1987 that was focused primarily on the problem of money in politics. Louisiana at the time was a state that had no limits on contributions, either the source of contributions or the amount of contributions, no disclosure requirements. And he set up a voluntary system limiting his contributions, taking no money from PACs, and disclosing every single dollar he received. He raised about $1.8 million. Edwards raised about 10 times that amount. But he beat Edwards in the primary, and Edwards withdrew from the final round so that Buddy Roemer was effectively the uncontested winner. Now, when people say or try to understand how Roemer won that race, he was way behind in the polls and then came ahead to beat Edwards. Some people like me say it was obviously because he talked about money in politics. That was the key issue that made it possible for him to win. There's a story, Wikipedia is one source, but I've actually confirmed it, so we don't have to rely on Wikipedia, which is in the final debate. The question was asked of all the candidates, would they endorse Edwards if Edwards, in fact, were the nominee? And they went around, and each of them, in their mealy-mouthed politician way, said, yes, of course, I'd endorse the nominee. And Roemer was the last one to speak, and Roemer said, no, we have to slay the dragon. And that became the campaign slogan for the rest of the campaign, and he eventually won. But my other Republican friend, I have a couple of them, but my other Republican friend, who is bizarrely Frank Luntz, who is infamous in these circles, said to me the reason Buddy Roemer won is that he had the very best political campaign ad ever in the history of campaign ads. So I'm just going to show you this briefly. You can tell me whether you think Frank Luntz is correct.
Some insiders say I'm not a good politician because I say things that make some people angry. They're right. I do. Made some people in Washington angry when I refused to take a congressional pay raise, passed by the politicians, for the politicians. I thought the country needed to tighten its belt. I made the bureaucrats and deadheads in Baton Rouge angry when I said I'd reduce the number of state cars and scrub the budget. I made the polluters angry when I said those who pollute the air and water should pay to clean it up. Clean it up or get out, I said. I made the education bureaucrats angry when I said I'd brick up the top 3 floors of the Department of Education, cut the consultants, and pay the teachers. I notice my opponents don't make many people angry. That doesn't surprise you, does it? Politics as usual. I don't like Louisiana politics. I love Louisiana. I love Louisiana enough to make some people angry.
So despite that extraordinary ad, 4 years later, there was another fight. Edwin Edwards returned to that fight to challenge Roemer. In the meantime, Roemer had switched to the Republican Party, and not all Republicans in the Republican Party were eager to have him be the nominee for this. In particular, one grand wizard, David Duke, decided to enter the race, and there was a three-man race, and Roemer was the third person in that race, and he then endorsed Edwards so that Edwards could beat Duke, and Louisiana wouldn't have a racist as its governor. Since then, Roemer has been a businessman and a banker and a farmer. He's currently running a small community bank, about $700 million in assets, which he started about 5 years ago. Now, as everyone here knows, the issue that Roemer has made his political passion, the role of money in politics, is an issue that has become extremely important to me. And indeed, the more I have thought about the politics in this issue, the more I've begun to believe that we Democrats are the Moses on this issue, and that we need to remember Moses didn't lead the people to the promised land. That if this issue is to be understood and if we're to prevail in this nationally, it's going to be only because it's pushed by someone on the other side, a Republican. And therefore, I was extremely happy when Roemer accepted my invitation to come talk about fixing Congress from a Republican perspective, which he and I both understood to mean speaking about money in politics in the context of Congress. But then he went and complicated things because between the time of him accepting my invitation to speak and this speech, he also announced that he was going to run an exploratory committee to see whether he would be the Republicans' candidate for president, a campaign which will also be a campaign focused on money. And so that's, of course, led me to worry whether I now have to invite all the other Republican candidates to speak or maybe the Democratic candidate to speak. But I'm hopeful that if we can keep this conversation tonight aimed at our target and forget that we might have before us, for those of us who think that this is the most important issue in American politics, the man who might actually be able to lead us to the promised land and listen to this response or complement to the insights of Jim Cooper, who gave us his comments about fixing Congress, we can avoid that complexity. So I'm extremely happy to welcome back to Harvard and to the Edmund J. Safra Center, Governor Buddy Roemer.
Thank you, Larry. Microphone just collapsed. Let me put it back on a second. We so carefully worked to get this ready. I'm happy to be here. I had some pain when I walked on campus last night. I came here as a 16-year-old. I had never flown. It was my first trip away from home alone. It was my first subway ride. It was a long way from a cotton field in North Louisiana. But I have great memories of Harvard and the teachers I had and the classmates I had. So it's an honor to be here. It's particularly an honor to follow Jim Cooper, a friend. In fact, his brother was my campaign manager in my first successful campaign for Congress back in 1980. Jim and I served together in the United States Congress from 1983 to 1988. And I have enormous respect for him and for the service he's given the nation. Both in Congress and by delivering the speech, I tuned into C-SPAN late on a Louisiana night a week or so ago to listen to the wonderful speech. In fact, I thought the speech was one of the most important I'd ever heard about the issue of our democracy, particularly from a seated member of Congress who has every reason to keep things just like they are. There's much that Jim and I agree about when diagnosing the problems that burden this branch of government, this House of Representatives. I agree that our Congress has evolved to be the worst of parliamentary government. I agree that we've allowed the institution to evolve to erase even the possibility that decent compromise might follow from careful deliberation. These changes have made Congress that he and I know radically different from the Congress that now is. They've made our republic weaker and our capacity for governance weaker still. But there's a part of the story that I believe the congressman has missed. Not because he would disagree with me about its importance and about the damage it's caused, but because being part of Washington, he doesn't think the system can run any way but the way it is. Now, I mean here the place of money in our democracy. Bucks, dollars, checks. I read recently with horror an interesting Associated Press piece where fellow members of Congress were applauding the selection of a new Republican as one of the leaders of their party, and their praise was the fact that he could raise so much money to benefit his party. Here was the quote, $1 million a night, they bragged. $1 million a night, I thought. A leader for sure. Far more profound than the loss of civility within the halls of Congress, and far more significant than the loss of friendship across the aisle, is the fact that our Congress has become obsessed with an endless drive to raise campaign funds. You hear me? Endless, nonstop. And I think it defines the devastating change that our Congress has undergone over the past 30 years since I graced those halls. And I understand why people within the system can't imagine the system functioning any other way. It's precisely why we need people outside the system to put a constructive eye on the system itself. Now, as some of you know, I'm trying to do this. I am fortunate not only to have the honor of speaking at Harvard, but also to have the honor of exploring the possibility of becoming the Republican nominee for President of these United States. I come to this race as a former congressman and as a former governor. But more importantly, I come to this race as a current businessman who's built a successful bank not on Wall Street, but on Main Street, USA. I come to this race as a citizen with the widest range of experience in government of any of the Republican candidates, and with an increasing impatience with the inability of government to do its job, and because of the role of special interest money in government's inability to govern. I come to this race with a $100 limit on individual giving. We'll accept no PAC money, regardless of the PAC's pretty name. And every contribution will be reported by name and address, no exception. Roemer rules, free to lead. I'm not here today, however, to convince you that I should be the Republican nominee for president. I've made many mistakes in my political life, although believing that a Harvard audience would be a productive venue for winning Republican votes is not one of them. You'll get over it, gang. I do believe that Abe Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt would have done just fine in these Harvard halls. But I'm here to give my view of how Congress should be fixed. You won't be surprised to hear that my view of how we should fix Congress is very similar to the view of how we should fix the presidency. Same theory. In both cases, I believe we need a government that's free to lead, free of the bias, free of the influence, free of the corruption of special interest money. In my view, we don't fix Congress until we fix this. In my view, we don't fix government until we fix this. In my view, we don't re-earn the respect of the American people until we fix this. And thus all of us, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Tea Partiers, Progressives, need to focus on how to fix this. There is no problem more important for us to solve, not a debt that's mightier than a mountain on the chest of our children, not the loss of manufacturing jobs in an astounding percentage, not the existence of inequity and a playing field completely unlevel in the American landscape, not the business of alternatives to poverty, not our addiction to foreign oil or foreign credit, because until we solve this problem of money in politics, we won't have the capacity to solve this almost endless list of critical problems. Leadership not free to lead, does not lead, cannot lead, will not lead. I won election to Congress as a conservative Democrat, the same night Ronald Reagan was elected as a Republican president. Today, I would have been called a blue dog Democrat, as Larry said in his introduction. But Tip O'Neill called us boll weevils because we attacked the entrenched Democratic majority just like they were a cotton field ripe for harvest. Tip had a way with words. When I got to Washington, we signed up to rebuild America. And I was proud to work with President Reagan as he tried to remake our government. I remember well the fight for President Reagan's first major legislative effort, a fundamental change to our tax system. I was a supporter of the change, one of the many Reagan Democrats who crossed party lines to give the Gipper his first important legislative victory. And I believed and still believe that the changes he made would make our economy and nation stronger. Among the most important ideas in the Reagan tax bill was a critical supply-side component called the Research and Development Tax Credit. This proposal cut taxes by up to 20% for qualified research expenditures and was intended to incentivize investment that otherwise would not be made. There were some on our side of the aisle who were skeptical the change would work. They worried this cut would reduce revenue substantially without actually changing the incentives of business to invest. That was fair. So at first, the Democratic leadership opposed the idea. But so sure was the Republican administration that this idea was a good one, that they made an offer too good for even the Democrats to refuse. They suggested that the tax cut be temporary, and that after a reasonable period, we would ask the economists of the nation whether it had in fact worked. If it had, we could then make the R&D tax credit permanent. If it hadn't, it would fade away. After a few years, the reviews were in. The R&D tax credit was an unmitigated success. But here's the puzzle. In the almost 30 years since we enacted the tax credit, Congress has yet to make it permanent. Instead, each couple of years, Congress brings it to the floor and votes it up again. With one exception, they voted it down for some reason and then went back 6 months later and made it retroactive so no one missed a beat. Why is this? Why does a tax policy so obviously good for jobs and good for American competitiveness not be a permanent part of the tax code? And I could give other examples before I answer that question. But anytime there's a permanent and wealthy interest on the other side, you can expect our tax system to make their benefits temporary. So that each time there's an election, guess what? There's an endless list of people calling to donate to the campaign funds of members of Congress. The tax code is an unreadable 5,500 pages. Unreadable. It hinders American competitiveness. It ought to be clear and simple and progressive and fair. It ought to reward job formation, shouldn't it? It ought to reward small businesses where 2 out of 3 new jobs are created. It ought to make America a tax haven to get capital from all over the world invested in our nation. It does none of these things. We craft an insanely complicated system of special favors to the richest and most powerful in our society. So Congress can better collect campaign contributions. And lobbyists can assure permanent clients. That's the game. Do you see it? The tax system isn't about government revenue. The tax system isn't about job formation. The tax system's not about fairness or helping people who need help or rewarding those who help others. The tax system is about campaign financing. It's about campaign funds. It's about money. You can glimpse the critical dynamic to how our government now works in the one example I gave you. The question Congress asks over and over is not just what makes sense for America, but what makes sense for Congress. And not Congress, the institution. Congress, the jewel of the republic that our framers gave us. No. But Congress, as in the 535 fundraisers, who must find a way to raise revenues that the congressional campaigns need. We tax or we don't to inspire campaign contributions. We listen or we don't to inspire campaign contributions. We regulate or we don't to inspire campaign contributions. We don't govern, we grovel. We don't lead, we collect. Hoping that we do little harm and occasional good. But it's not about a tax system. It's about a campaign system. It's how they get reelected. Congress has become a nonstop fundraiser by night and a jobs auction for retiring congresspersons during the day. It doesn't take a Bossier High School education to realize that this system isn't good for America. And the single most important task for our political system, in my opinion, is the recognition that this system must change. If America is to retain its greatness, if we are to be to our children and grandchildren what we were as children, we have to take on this problem systematically and deliberately. It's a government in which members spend the majority of their time raising money. Members of both parties, I pick not on Democrats, both parties. This is not the republic our framers intended. And that a government that thinks first about how to secure campaign welfare, not general welfare, is not a government that can answer the challenges that the world is giving us day after day. A nation is unprepared for its future because it's dwelling on its present, collecting more money for re-election. We need a Congress that can afford to talk honestly and openly and seriously about the complex issues of our time. We need a Congress that can lead. This Congress can't. It doesn't have time. In my view, we need to find a way to build a Congress that's free to lead. Nowhere is this point more obvious than when thinking about Congress leadership in my industry, the banking industry. I'm a community banker, Main Street kind of guy. America has just suffered the greatest economic decline that we have known since the Great Depression. In 21 months, we lost $17 trillion in household wealth. 3.6 million jobs were lost in 2008 while George Bush was president. 2008 alone. That was the largest loss since 1940. The unemployment rate, when coupled with the underemployment rate, exceeds 20%. Check it out. Unemployment at 8.9, quit looking for jobs at 4, and underemployed at 15 to 20. Real GDP declined at an annual rate of 4% in the third quarter of 2008, and half again more in the fourth quarter of the same year. We have no more non-farm payroll jobs today. That's 131 million. That was the same number 12 years ago in 1999. You hear me? In 12 years, this economic engine has added not one new non-farm payroll job. Not one. Home prices have fallen nationally by a third and continue to fall. And more than 2 years after the collapse, small banks across America continue to fail at record rates. Unlike any recession of the last 110 years, women lost jobs net in this recession. It didn't happen in any recession of the 20th century. And college graduate unemployment in this recession exceeded that in all others in American history. There were at least a dozen different factors aligned to yield financial collapse in 2008. But the strongest share of this disaster, in my opinion, rests at the feet of the greedy and irresponsible financial executives basking in the moneyed sunlight of Wall Street, where some of you might be headed. No doubt, the not-so-rich wanted bigger houses and cheaper mortgages, but it was a slew of insanely risky financial innovations that delivered these cheaper mortgages at a price America could not afford. I've been told by a member of Fannie Mae that 3 million Americans had mortgages they didn't make the first month payment on. All endorsed by Wall Street, made possible by their greed because Wall Street got their $15,000 fee on every damn one of them. Wall Street gave mortgage lenders a way to bundle their mortgages and remove them from their books. That led the mortgage lenders to stop caring much for whether the mortgages they issued could be repaid. Who cared? Not surprisingly, more and more mortgages were issued that homeowners couldn't repay. And when the defaults began, the house of cards that was our financial sector collapsed. To avoid an even greater disaster, a Republican president had to direct his former Goldman Sachs CEO and now Secretary of the Treasury, great work if you can get it, to direct the largest bailout in anyone's history. $700 billion was committed by Treasury. By the way, if you take 3 million mortgages where the first month payment wasn't repaid at an average home price of $240,000, what does that come up to you, mathematician? $720 billion. What was the bailout for? Hello. Not only did the Treasury commit $700 billion to the bailout, they committed many, many trillions secretly, were loaned by the Federal Reserve to grab the economy before it fell off a cliff. Trillions. It's been estimated as much as 13 trillion. According to Gretchen Morgeson, financial columnist in the New York Times, reader if you don't normally do every Sunday, in a recent column entitled, "So That's Where the Money Went," banks got trillions. From September 15th through the end of that same month, borrowings averaged $100 billion a day by the Wall Street biggest 19 banks. At almost no interest rates, free money. I find it unbelievable and done in the dark. It was a gift that hard-working families didn't get, did they? But the big boys got it. They made sure they got it. This operation was called Primary Dealer Credit Facility and was the engine for the Fed to quietly get trillions to banks too big to fail. Goldman Sachs did 212 transactions of this type, totaling slightly more than $600 billion. Goldman Sachs. The head of that same firm was telling America, and they testified publicly, that they didn't need any help from the Fed or the government. The word liar forms in my mind. I would never use that word. It forms in my mind. Goldman Sachs not only received 60% of $1 trillion, they paid almost nothing for it, subsidized to the tune of some $30 billion in taxpayer money. They were either paid by the taxpayers as $30 billion or by Chinese creditors. Take your pick. As Edward J. Kane, a professor of economics at Boston College, wrote, "Never have so few owned so much to so many and given them so small a return. Only in America." So we can agree. The Federal Reserve needs transparency and accountability. And did the financial reform bill of last year address these issues? Of course not. The money monster's still in control. Lawyers to be, you might be at the wrong school. And did the financial reform bill eliminate the too big to fail phenomenon? No, of course not. In fact, banks are set this year, the top 19, to be larger than when the original failure came. The bill didn't reduce them in size or increase their capital ratio or make them safer. It rewarded them. Wall Street is unpunished, undisciplined, unregulated, unchanged. They own Washington. Washington under Bush and Obama provided guarantees against failure, furnished capital at virtually no cost as needed, and assumed the moral hazard of unlimited and unrestrained growth, and subsidized them to the tune of billions every month. So that's why the Wall Street banks fight any reform that might force them to be smaller or more prudent or raise more capital or reinstate the Glass-Steagall provisions of Franklin Roosevelt. Wall Street banks were once a source of capital that enhanced American business. They financed innovation. They made America more competitive. A great place, Wall Street. Don't misunderstand me. In their original mission statement, the best on earth. But my God, how far they have fallen. Wake up, America. Times have changed. What I've known for years as a Main Street banker, you should now know Wall Street doesn't produce jobs. It produces fees, bonuses, and a drain on the American taxpayer. Its job is to protect its guarantee fee structure. What Wall Street now produces is the regulation it needs to protect the billions in fees it now charges. Wow. As America has and is paying the enormous price of the gamble made by Wall Street has profited at a historic rate. Do you see it? I'm not against financial innovation. I'm against irresponsible banking. I'm against the system in which bankers play the slots, with America paying the tab. Even worse, I'm against the system in which the government rigs the slot machines so the biggest bankers always win, while the taxpayer, fools that we are, and the homeowners cover the losses. Rigged. Too big to fail is rigged. You can't win. Instead, what I am for are old-fashioned bankers. People who carefully and conservatively build wealth by exercising enormous prudence and good judgment, who know their customers and who know their communities. I know every one of my communities. I have banks in 7 communities: Thibodaux, Lafayette, Lake Charles, Shreveport, Baton Rouge. I know my people. I work with them. That's what a banker does. Anybody can be a banker in a good time. It's when times are tough. That's when you find out who the bankers are. They're not on Wall Street. I'm for the kind of banking practiced by the banker who's endowed this center, the Edmund J. Safra Center, whose patience and care earned his depositors and shareholders a fair and generous return. But the ethics of Edmund J. Safra are not the ethics of Wall Street. Not anymore. Because prudence and patience were not Wall Street's first aim. Instead, what Wall Street has done over the past 30 years is to incentivize not manufacturing or innovation or engineering skill or competitive edges. Instead, what Wall Street has done is to incentivize regulatory innovation. What a great phrase. Regulatory innovation. I can't wait to see one. They looked at the system of prudence and control that we inherited from our grandfathers, and they realized they could make more money if the system were less prudent. And so they pushed through lobbyists and campaign contributions in the millions and millions and millions of dollars. You ought to see how much Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac spent on lobbying Congress. Your tax money. Hundreds of millions. They did it to both Republicans and Democrats to radically deregulate Wall Street. Republicans and Democrats. I'm not picking parties here. I've been in both. President Bush pushed for financial deregulation, but it was President Clinton who was the master. In 1998, he led the fight to free Wall Street from the restraints of Glass-Steagall, a 65-year-old Franklin Roosevelt prohibition from mixing the risk of investment banking with the prudence of commercial banking. The repeal of Glass-Steagall led directly to the too-big-to-fail bailout status of our current rigged banking system. Is it a surprise that the fastest growth, listen to this, the fastest growth of campaign contributions of any sector of our economy has come from the financial sector? Are you shocked? And that these contributions produced a regulatory regime that was incapable of recognizing or responding to the enormous systemic risk that the financial sector created. What did Congress do, by the way, in the great financial debate to modify or re-regulate this industry? According to Frank Rich of the New York Times in a recent column, and I quote, "During the congressional battle over financial services reforms last May, the new Democrat coalition members," there's a party, that Democratic Party, "the new Democrat coalition members repaired to a retreat on Maryland's eastern shore to frolic with the lobbyists dedicated to weakening the legislation." Way to go, guys. Rich goes on to write, "America needs a rally, or better still, a leader or two, or even three, to restore not just honor or sanity to its citizens, but governance that's not auctioned off to the highest bidder." Now, let me be clear. In this process, I doubt there was a single member of Congress that was bribed to support these regulatory changes. I doubt that there was even a single bribe offered. It's the system that's corrupt. It's the system. And members are slave to it. These changes were willingly given by a Congress that was obsessed with the need to raise money. Obsessed. And deregulation for them was an easy out. Economist after economist submitted brief after brief endorsing an ever more radical theory of deregulated financial services, never noting, of course, that they were on the payroll of a bank or a firm. Those briefs gave the politicians all the cover they needed to undo the system of regulation that had given us the longest run without a banking crisis in the history of our nation. So they changed the system. Wall Street wanted to earn short-term profit. It was everything. We wouldn't have to walk down this path of deregulatory craziness if Congress had been free to lead. That's my premise. You don't have to do it like me. I want you to be free to figure out what the right thing is, and damn it, do it. It is my view that if agreeing with the deregulators wasn't so valuable to the campaign coffers, we might have had more independent thinking in Congress. I didn't come to this belief without evidence. Look at former Congressman, a Republican from Iowa, Congressman Jim Leach. Leach was on the House Banking Committee. I was on the committee too. Got off to run for governor and won and left. Jim remained. He was a strong opponent to the move to deregulate derivatives. You've heard of that phrase, haven't you? Derivatives. That's a bet on a bet. Indeed, in 1994, after the saving and loan crisis, Jim issued a strong report calling for the need for regulation to assure oversight in this already overheating market. The report was ignored by Capitol Hill. It was ridiculed by industry insiders. Leach opposed deregulation of derivatives not because he was a socialist, not because he was a friend of big government. Republican Jim Leach did this because he was free to think about whether the emerging market of deregulated instruments made sense for our economy. Was it risk-free? He asked. He was free to think about this because he, like I, had made a pact while in Congress with his constituents never to accept PAC contributions from any special interest, whether banks or unions. Leach was the rare independent voice on the banking committee. With that independence brought him and our nation was the freedom to decide what made sense and to act upon it. Unfortunately for us, Leach was alone in his approach. I don't know if any other member of the banking committee except me had made the same pledge, and I think America's the worst off because of it. What would a better system look like? I'm not convinced that anyone has the perfect answer yet. I don't. But I do think we know enough to begin to identify the basic elements. We must make this beginning, however, a beginning to identify the elements of a system that could leave Congress free to lead. We must start this process. We have to do it in the light of the rules that the Supreme Court has given us. For 40 years, the Supreme Court has said no to efforts by reformers to dampen or silence speech. And I think properly so. Money is speech, as exercised in America. And while contributions to candidates can be limited, if they're large enough not to be viewed as a bribe, the Supreme Court has repeatedly held that expenditures can't be limited, either by a campaign or independently. And most recently, even independent expenditures by corporations and unions can't be limited at all. I'm not a fan of every one or all of these decisions. Citizens United in particular could do this nation great harm. Could. It now depends on us. In 2010, we saw a frantic growth in independent expenditures. They were up over 300%. In my view, elections are the time for clearly labeled debate. They're not the time for the ugliest and least responsible political speech of our culture to drown out any hope for political dialogue. But it won't do any good just now to spend our time railing about the Supreme Court. And I like them anyway. We got a job to do. We have to craft a system of independence for Congress within the boundaries given to us by the court. Here's how we should begin. We need a Congress that's independent enough to represent the people. Here's my thought. To represent the people, not just people with money. I'm not putting down people with money. Be clear. Congress should be independent enough to represent all people, not just people with money. The framers meant Congress to be dependent upon the people. Indeed, read Federalist 52, and I quote, dependent upon the people alone. That's what it says. Our Congress is not now dependent upon the people alone. It is dependent as well upon campaign funders. So our first objective must be to remove this dependency by expanding the number of givers. It's just that simple. We don't take away from those who give. We add to their numbers. We balance this system. We balance this system. In my campaign for the presidency, I have committed to do just this by accepting no more than $100 from any one person and accepting no PAC contributions. In my view, PACs have become another tool by which the limits on others are broken and to circumvent disclosure. Let me call it what it is: money bundling, money laundering. Those of you in law will run across those phrases. They apply to political campaigns. Not all PACs are in business for that. But since it's difficult to distinguish one from another, my policy, as it was in Congress, no PAC contributions. It's been called to my attention that those running for president use PACs every day with contributions of $300,000 per individual or more. It's what I'm talking about. Now, many political pundits say the $100 limit and PAC elimination are too restrictive to run for president. I like Roemer. Can't win. Fox loves that line. Like Roemer, fighter. Can't win. Of course we can. If I can convince one person out of every 100 Americans to contribute $100, I will raise and spend more money than John McCain and Mitt Romney did in the primaries of 2008. $100. When this nomination is won and we turn to face a president in a classy debate about a great nation, we'll need 2 out of every 100 Americans to contribute $100. 2 out of 100. And we'll match the Democrat nominee dollar for dollar in the general election. The difference will be the $100 limit. He won't have it. I will. The difference at the end of the day will be a president free to lead. He doesn't have it. I do. A president ought to represent 100% of American people. Not just the 1% who give, but the 99% who do not, who have never given a dime to a president. A president free to turn to Congress and craft a system that relies on small contributions from real people, not special interest money from a select few. I deliberately don't have the details of what that final system ought to look like. It'll take a lot of work, a lot of advice. It'll take a team to do it right. But it's my belief that it starts at the top, with the president committed to replacing the special interest money machine with one open to every citizen who wants a stronger, freer, fairer, more hopeful America. Now that's a special interest worth fighting for. The system should not silence anyone or any view. That's the first truth of what we'll work for. This was the kernel of truth in the Citizens United Court decision. The fact that it's a corporation speaking does not by its nature make the speech any less valuable or important to our system of democratic deliberation. We need to hear all sides, particularly the opposition, in a healthy debate, don't we? First principle, the system should not silence anyone or any view. Second, no system should force any citizen to support political speech that he or she doesn't believe in. Basic principle. Third, it is the people, not the bureaucrats, who should determine what is available to run a campaign. Fourth, any system must encourage individuals to give at least small amounts of their own money to campaigns in which they believe. Politics is not passive anymore. The internet allows everyone to have skin in the game. It's what makes it possible for me to run. It's why I haven't done this before. I've dreamed about it for 20 years, since I left Congress. For 20 years. I knew it was coming. The internet makes it possible. These four principles would veto most of the reform proposals of the past 30 years, including the anti-corporation thrust of McCain-Feingold and the Fair Elections Now Act with its large government-determined subsidies. These principles would permit a system that mixed vouchers with individual contributions as long as the vouchers came from funds the voters have contributed personally. Some have suggested programs that allocate a small bit of money each taxpayer returns to the Treasury to a democracy voucher. Individuals would be free to give this voucher to any candidate for Congress who agreed to limit contributions to his campaign to the $100 from an individual. Under this system, no one's speech is being silenced. No one tax dollars are being used to fund any speech they don't agree with. No government bureaucrat is deciding how campaign funding is being allocated, and individuals would be free to contribute beyond the vouchered amount. Figuring out these important details and what works best for this representative democracy is what needs to happen among members of the audience, citizens groups, the world of scholarship, and in political debate itself. It's a work in progress, but the time has come. From Iowa to New Hampshire, from Charleston to Cambridge, from Baton Rouge to Bakersfield, we need to continue the debate, not on what needs to be done. We know what needs to be done. Break up the special interest money monster. Not on that, but on how best to change the system when we finally get a president who's got the freedom and courage to lead, who touched the labor unions, who touched the big corporations, who touched the tort lawyers, who touched the pharmacy industry, who'll ask insurance to compete. These are the issues of our time, and they're being avoided. We need to turn our beliefs and values into governance, and it begins with the money in politics. It begins with acknowledging the problem of special interests. I call it institutionally corrupt money, a phrase stolen from a guy named Lessig. Only when we deal with the money can we begin to honestly discuss and resolve the issues of the day. You see my belief. Only then. Money to interest weigh when they hear us. I read it wrong. Money interests laugh when they hear us talk about issues that matter. They laugh. I've been laughed at since my first day in Congress. I take it as a mark of pride. They're not laughing anymore. They laugh because they know the system is rigged in their favor. That's how they built it. They know that regardless of how passionately or fervently we feel about health care or war or Wall Street or the national debt or the environment or a decent job or a just nation. Our voices don't matter, do they? Money talks. Our voices don't matter. They don't matter as long as they, the 1%, can pay for the outcomes they want. Washington, D.C. is a boom town, and the rest of the nation is at risk. Special interest money. It's just the price of doing business, guys. They pour their money into campaigns and lobbyists to ensure the results. They never lose. They win by dividing us into issues designed to keep us apart. You know the issues, they don't matter. But that's what they want to talk about, left and right. Look American to me. Left and right, in and out, up and down. These are not the issues. The few dictate to the many. Look at the banking bill, where the too big to fail not only survive, they got bigger. Look at the health care bill, where the huge pharmaceutical companies are guaranteed billions in price supports, paid for by patients often too poor to be sick. My God, who wrote that bill? A disgrace. I've been a diabetic for 40 years. I live health care. A disgrace. 2,000 pages of poppycock with a problem unsolved. A disgrace. Special interest money's in control. Every presidential wannabe meets behind closed doors with the big money people. I won't mention their names. We need to take our nation back. We need to take our values back. We need to lessen the hold of special interest money on our lives. Let me tell you how it starts. It's a simple plan, and I need you. It's a $100 limit. No packs. A name with every contribution. The rich are asked to give, and the not so rich are requested the same. A president free to lead. That's how a nation is reclaimed from the stranglehold of corrupt special interest money. I'm going to close with this. I landed in D.C. last Sunday. Over the course of the 20 years I've been away from Washington, I go back once every year or two. I love America, and I go back to its capital. So I flew in last Sunday as a guy exploring the chance of running for president. Nobody knows me. Didn't know me at the airport. I got in a cab, he didn't know me. I had a cold, I was glad he didn't know me. I didn't feel like talking. I landed at Dulles and about halfway to my Holiday Inn suite. The cabbie turned his head and said, "What are you in D.C. for, man?" I said, "For business." I was doing CNN and CBS and New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and I had 3 days of that. But I said, "For business." And he had an accent, as many cabbies do in D.C., and I asked him, "Where are you from, man?" He said, "I'm from Islamabad, Pakistan." I said, "How long you been in America?" He said, 13 years. He asked me, "How do you like D.C.? Have you been before?" I said, "I have. I've been many times. Used to live here for a while." I said, "But before I answer your question, how do you like D.C.?" Here's what he told me. He didn't know who I was. I hadn't said anything politically. He said, man, Islamabad, D.C., it's the same. Corrupt. He told me. He put his finger right in my chest, figuratively. And he said, here it's legal. In Islamabad, they cut off your hand. Legally corrupt. Can we win? I think we must. There's work to do. We're a nation of hope, opportunity, wonder, and freedom. And we're threatened by a money system out of control. Free to lead is a strong answer. Thank you.
As is our convention, we will have questions, and you signal to me that you want to ask a question. I will get a mic to you, and then when you have the mic, you get to ask the question. So the first one right back here. And I'm sorry, if you could identify yourself before you speak.
Yeah, Jay Livingston. That was an interesting stump speech. I wanted to ask you, though, one of the most influential lobbies in Washington is the Israel lobby. The lobby has been known not only to dispense a great deal of cash, but to target its opponents when they don't accept that cash or its policy recommendations. People like Paul Findley, Ike Skelton, Cynthia McKinney, Charles Percy, I could go on. Would you touch the Israel lobby as well as some of the other lobbies that you've mentioned?
I don't know its current status, but let me go back 30 years, 25 years when I was there. It was a powerful lobbying group, no doubt about it. At the time of Reagan's presidency, the tinderbox of the Middle East was just as tender as it is now. And several nations of the region had lobbying groups, but Israel was by far the most formidable. And you were correct. They sometimes, in my opinion, went overboard with the exercise of their power in this country to the tune of targeting certain members with their expenditures. But they're just really an example of what now has mushroomed in almost every debate and in every function. And I think the Israeli lobby at its greatest was small potatoes compared to what you see now in terms of specific PACs, Wall Street particularly, and other business interests are enormous. With the ruling of the Supreme Court, I think the union will participate the same way in that sort of thing. Good question.
David.
So, David Wilkins from Harvard Law School. Governor, I actually thought Larry was going to talk about what I thought was the best bumper sticker of any campaign, which came from that campaign, which was you and David
Vote for the crook.
It's important. And I want to actually pick up on that theme because I commend your personal restraint for the $100 contributions and your imploring others to do the same. But as I understand the system you propose, it would be a totally voluntary idea, which then you would have to then sell against what would still remain to be the unrestricted money pouring into the system. And I guess there are a couple of questions that flow from that. One is about it's important. That is, the reason why Vote for the Crook, It's Important was so powerful were, one, people could completely understand the issue as to why it was important for Louisiana not to have David Duke as its governor.
Right.
Second, that it was a motivation not so much for Edward Edwards,
Right.
but against David Duke.
Right.
And I wonder, isn't there a danger in a proposal when people are battling money, that they're going to have to do it by going negative.
Yes.
That the only way to motivate people in such a system is to go negative. It isn't that one of the major issues that you are fighting against in your own personal rhetoric. And then I guess the last thing is, it's going to take an enormous amount of time to raise money this way. And that's also one of the things you're battling against, is people not having the time to govern.
Yes. Let me try to go through them quickly. And good questions. First of all, I helped come up with the bumper sticker, "Vote for the crook, it's important." Because I didn't want to be negative. That was the most positive thing I could think of, Edwards versus Duke, Well, at least one of them's a crook. He's not a guy that hates Catholics, women, blacks, and Jews, and is proud of it. He's not a Nazi. In my style, I'm hard-hitting, but I try not to be negative. I tried not to mention names today, okay? And tried to lean on both the Republican and the Democratic Party. I'm proud to be a Republican. It was a decision that I labored at for years, and I'm just proud to be a Republican. But it's a party a long way from perfection, Lord knows. And I've been as frustrated in the Republican Party as I always was in the Democratic Party. That's a party with no business sense at all, the Democrats. And the Republicans seem to be a party often of no people sense. These are people. But to your specific question of the restrictions that I've put, it will require action after victory. Victory is just the first step. It will require, as I mentioned, I think exactly, teamwork. Republicans and Democrats and Tea Partiers and progressives and independents to agree with the leader, the president, that this is an issue worth coming together on. And I think the answer might require a constitutional address. Maybe not, but I'm open to those possibilities. The case I made today, perhaps too wordily, was that this won't happen without leadership. And in the political process, the leader is the president. And I thought President Obama made a better speech than I did about this when he was running 2 years ago. He said it in speech after speech. He railed against special interest money and then didn't do a damn thing about it. So I came to the conclusion that a speech is not good enough. You've got to live it. You've got to set your campaign how you would have optimally set a campaign if the law would accommodate it. And you've got to be the first, and you might be annihilated while doing it, but it's worth doing. And your risk is $100. 4 movies and 5 bags of popcorn. That's your risk. And the internet makes it possible to take a dream long felt and a situation where it's deeply needed and lead by example. I think I can win this thing. I see my field in the Republican Party as being good, but modest in many ways. And I like getting them on the stump, as Jay sarcastically said. I like the debate. I like asking Mitt Romney, where did the money come from? I like asking Newt Gingrich about where did all the PACs go. I don't mind it at all. So I thought I would start in my party and see if it could address this issue. At the very least, we will, for the first election in years and years and years, make this an issue debated in every debate. Our next debate, televised nationally, is the first or second day in May from California. All the candidates will be there for the first time. Watch it. They're not happy right now.
In the back.
Hi, my name is Maithili. I'm an undergraduate student at the college. Any Republican presidential candidate during this election will be faced with the difficult task of carrying out the positive elements of President George W. Bush's legacy. Many people feel that the most successful decision President Bush made was to invest in life-saving treatment for HIV/AIDS in Africa, a decision that was based on moral values rather than on money. Would you commit to scaling up the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief and treating 6 million people by 2015?
I don't know about the time frame. I don't know enough information to give you an honest answer, but I support the initiative. In fact, I was a small part of him making that original initiative. Southern University, the greatest African-American college in terms of number of students, is in my hometown of Baton Rouge. And I work with the president there. His name is Leon Tarver, close friend. As governor, I appointed him president of Southern University. He went to Harvard, and we went to see President Bush about making this an initiative. I don't know if we caused it to be done, but we were there in the early stages. I strongly support it. That's a clear position of humanitarian aid that doesn't meet any other agenda, but that it's the right thing to do. And the dollars we spend on that are pennies. You know, if we were to take the $9 billion to some lesser number because of overall budget, so be it. But I like the initiative. Good question.
Hi, my name is...
Where are you?
She's right here.
Oh, hey.
Right here. My name is Merrill. I'm also an undergraduate at the college. And my question about this, and I think this is a good idea. I like the specific points that you bring up about the $100 limit. When I think about this stuff, I often think about it even going further than that. I think this is a great idea. But I do think that money, it often seems like the end in itself, but the means, but rather the money is the means to the end of votes. And I think that something we've seen recently is that voting is so erratic. You have different people voting in the different elections. They're already saying that the new Republican majority is at risk. You have the Republicans in Wisconsin who are, now people don't like what they were doing. The Democrats in 2008, they come in and all of a sudden, they're in danger because the re-election is so risky because you do have to go back to people who aren't really being educated about the issues in a way that makes them capable. Like, you have these polls that don't change very much. Americans like certain policies.
You're right.
Yet election after election, it's back and forth, and you can't do anything without making people angry. So I'm not sure if the money issue is necessarily enough if the people aren't really being educated about the issues themselves in these elections to understand that things have to be done and you have to really turn out to all the elections. You can't just drop out when you're not interested in something, because then the other side is going to be when the other side's going to be energized and you can't actually get anything done. You have to be extreme at any given point in time. So do you think that will change if the money changes, or do you think that is a different initiative that has to be taken after that?
Somebody once told me once, it was in a class here at college, Professor Erickson, a psychologist of world war fame, he said one day in class, he said, everybody on earth wants the same thing. What is it? And we had all kind of answers, and he said, no, everybody on earth wants to be listened to. They want to be heard. Wow. What I found in traveling America the last 20 years, building my banks, giving speeches, teaching class at different universities, is that there's a growing sense of disenfranchisement among people. They see the big dollars get, night in the Lincoln bedroom. They know who gets invited to the White House. We don't. They know that. And there's a rising, I'm not saying it's overwhelming yet, but I think there's an audience for, as Robert Frost would say, I'm going out to clean the pasture spring. You come too. I think there's a need here to say, you come too. You're only 19, but you come. Help an older man get it right. And I've got to do that in New Hampshire. I mean, I'm gonna slowly walk and talk across New Hampshire. I'm going to take this Southern accent as far as I can. I know it's maybe crazy, but everywhere I go, it gets quiet. And people say, you know, that son of a gun, he could do it. Now, there were times when I wasn't ready. I wanted to win more than serve. There were times in my life where I was overly ambitious. I was self-centered. That's a confession that anyone could make, couldn't they? You grow through that. You grow up. I wasn't ready at 40 to take the risk of being made a fool of running for president and no one cared. But at 67, I'm old enough to know the difference between right and wrong, and I'm young enough to do the right thing. I'm the perfect age for this. I can risk everything on this because you know what it's for? It's for America. My God, it's not for me. I could have a happy life and never spend a day in the White House. Oh, I dread it. I guarantee if elected, I won't spend many days there anyway. I'll be out listening to you. That's what presidents need to do. They don't do it. So, your point is well made. There are all sorts of enemies to revolutions. George Washington wrote that he thought that half the people in New Jersey were against the revolution when he was riding his troops through New Jersey. You ever thought about that? In the American Revolution, you think it was 100% for the revolution? No, it wasn't. It was close. Now, this will be close. To win in the Republican primary, I might need 25% of the vote. I can do it. I can do it. In the greatest of fields, I can carve off that sort of thing. But more important than that is to keep the issue alive. If I rested my case after this campaign, win or lose, but Larry would call me and Rob would call me and say, you established the issue, buddy. Thank God. Man, I would feel like $1 million. I'm not sure what I remember Jimmy Carter for, but I know what Buddy Roemer would be remembered for. $100, free to lead.
I think we have one last question right here.
Yes.
Governor?
Yes.
Your statement that we are unable to govern. By the way, I'm Herb Rosenfeld. I'm a visiting scholar from Columbia University in the economics department. But I also
I forgive
went to
you,
Harvard.
man.
That said,
Yeah.
our present president indicated his banners, his mantra, change.
Yeah.
He also
I liked it.
hundreds of millions of dollars from small contributions. But you haven't addressed...
Let me give you a number. He raised $235 million at $250 or less and didn't report any of their names. But a lot of money out there.
A lot of people contributed. A lot of people are disappointed.
And I think it gave him a lot of energy, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you have a lot of energy now, too,
Yeah.
even though he is 20 years your junior.
Yes, sir.
19. But you haven't addressed the real issues of America. You discussed the $100, but how can you put people back to work? How will you develop or construct the health issue? How will you correct the deplorable education system? How will you take 27% of functionally illiterate children and improve their life? How will you change the tax system?
Yeah.
Why have you not discussed something like a luxury fee? Not a VAT, but a luxury fee. Where are the specifics? Where's the meat? I heard the bone. I see the bone. And it's compelling.
I've been
But you
called a
have
lot of things. I've never been called the bone, but I like it. It's a start. Well, it's a good question, and it's something that I've struggled with as my friends will tell you, I want to go out and solve the problem. I mean, I want to give you the tax code. I want to tell you how we can make small business more competitive. I want to talk about stopping the borrowing from China. We're addicted to Chinese credit. We need an energy policy. I love all those things. However, none of them will get done until the president is free to get them done. Congress is not going to do it. They're gridlocked. They're after the money. The president can't be gridlocked. He's got to be free. And Obama's real strength to me, you know, I was a John McCain guy. We served in Congress together. We served in the war of Congress together. And I trusted John, and I honored him. And I was proud to be a volunteer. The only presidential candidate I ever helped was John McCain. But I listened to Barack Obama, and I loved it. His hope, his optimism, his sense of change. And he gave the same speech I gave. He did it in his style, maybe much better. He talked about the caustic effect of special interest money. He talked about how Washington was not a place of ideas and progress, and that we needed to bring change to it. He was right, and it's what won for him overwhelmingly. But he forgot to tell us that he took the money too. He took the Wall Street money. He took the Goldman Sachs money. He took the bank. Look at the record. He took more than McCain did. He took all this small money and then trumped it with the big money. And he's not free. You know when I knew that I had to get up off my butt and say something was the health care bill. We talked about the banking bill today, and it was a disaster. Health care was even worse. Pharmaceuticals got a free ride. Insurance companies don't come under Sherman Antitrust Act provisions. They escape. I had a pharmaceutical representative tell me that he'd gone to the White House multiple times to make sure the president knew they were not to be touched. That's a fact. Bought and sold health care. I'm telling you, I've thought about this 100 ways. I thought about showing you how to balance the budget over 5 years by making 1% of GDP cuts. I can do it. 5 years. It won't be done in 2 years. That hurts people. But over 5 years, we can get this country growing again. I love those kind of things. But I can't talk about it now until I make my point. Just like the young lady said, just like the gentleman said. I've got to make the point of why the $100 is important. It's important not to elect me, but it's important to elect me or someone better than me, and that they be free to lead. If they're free to lead, if they're not just a party hack, if they're an American leader, then we can come together and do all the things that you and I want to do. I'm talking to a Columbia professor right now, you know, Gratz, and he's written a very interesting book. That there's another way to look. I would love to talk about 8 different ways to do the tax code, but I'm not going to do it until I talk about the $100, because I am nothing without the freedom of the $100. I'm just another president, like Obama and Bush, just another president.
Thank you very much, Governor Roemer.
Thank you.